Well, hello, I'm 𝐂𝐫𝐸, welcome back. In this video today we're going to be covering the AC side of these TIG machines, mainly focusing on welding aluminum, covering AC balance, AC frequency, high frequency start, a lot of things like that. If you haven't seen part one, I'm going to highly recommend you check that video out first. I'll put a link below in the description, because in the part one we actually cover practicing, giving you the fundamental basics of TIG machines, tungsten, how to sharpen it, how to set up your TIG machine, and we're going to be running the Vulcan Pro TIG 205 and the Hynade 200. If you're not familiar with those machines, or you have a different machine, that's all right, because a lot of these settings we'll cover in here will basically cover a wide range of almost all TIGs on the market. So we're going to actually go through and talk about features, options, settings, real simple overview of that. We're going to start setting up the machine. We're going to cover prep of aluminum, different grades of aluminum and tungsten. Then we're getting into some practicing and starting to weld some joints. So stick around and enjoy the video. So first off, we're going to go over the processes of Vulcan Pro TIG 205. First off, we'll move it over to AC TIG. We got it set for 120 amps right now. We can dial this up or down. Found 120 is pretty good ballpark for 60-61 1/8" aluminum. And keep in mind, basically at this peak amp that we set on here, 120, when you push down the amp pedal, whenever you push it all the way down, that means that you'll max out 120 amps. So if you dial this thing up to 150, when you push that pedal all the way down, it will go all the way up to 150 at that point. So this is kind of our peak set amps. Next parameter is going to be pre-flow right here, and that's 1/2 second. Pre-flow is when you push down the pedal before the arc initiates, it lets a little bit of gas out to shield the welding area. Now we got AC frequency, and that's set at 120. This can go down to 50 and it will go up to 160. 120 is a good ballpark. Once you set it here, you're going to be pretty happy at 120. We'll go into a little more detail what AC frequency actually does a little bit later in the video. Next is AC balance. So it's set at 66. This machine will go up to 90 and it will go down to 50. I like it to be about 66. We'll talk a little bit more about features later. This is one of the things that will vary quite a bit on welding machines. Sometimes some will rate it as towards a negative side of things or towards a positive. It's a little confusing, but on this machine I like 66. Like I said, we'll cover AC balance a little bit later in the video. Next is post flow. We got it set for 5 seconds because aluminum cools off quick. Mainly my rule of thumb with post flow for welding aluminum, steel takes a lot longer to cool down, so you'd usually set a longer post flow. On aluminum, it cools down so quick that you can get away with a shorter post flow. Just make sure that your tungsten, by the time your gas stops, your tungsten isn't red hot. And we got pulse off. You can set pulse on. There's a lot of other settings, but to not make the video too complicated, we're not even going to run pulse today. Pulse is just a square wave that sets a full peak amp and a lower amp in duration. We don't need to get carried away with that, but again, I'll go over pulse settings a little bit later in the video, just talk briefly about that. That's basically all our settings we're going to have to deal with. Back to 120 amps. So now that we went through the simple basic settings in the Vulcan here, we're going to jump over this Hynade 200 GP. This machine is extremely similar to the Yeswelder 250P. Very similar, just a few slightly different options. This one's multi-voltage, the Yeswelder isn't, but they're very similar. This machine's so complex with settings, we're going to just kind of simplify it. It's got way more settings and features than this Vulcan or my buddy's Miller Dynasty. It's even got a spot weld feature. The stock torch that comes with it has an on-off switch for 2T and 4T. You can also buy an optional amperage control torch with it, which is a really cool thing in case you're welding in a location you just can't get to your foot control pedal. But even with this on-off torch up here, you can actually set things like start amperage when you push down the button. If you want to start at 10 amps, and you can set your duration of a ramp time until you get to peak amps, so say 4 seconds to reach 120 amps. And then when you let off the on-off switch up here, you can set your ramp down duration, say 6 seconds, and you can have it end on 5 amps. And of course, pre and post flow and AC balance, pulse settings, all that kind of stuff. But we're just going to go through the basic same settings that we did on the Vulcan and bypass all that, because that's a video in itself. And if you guys are interested in maybe seeing all the options of this machine and the Yeswelder and maybe a comparison of the two, leave a comment down below and I can always make a video on that as well. All right, let's dive into a few basic settings on this thing. So of course we got our 2T, 4T, and spot feature. You can actually change your spot time down here, but we're not going to cover that in this video. Go back to 2T to run it with the pedal. This has all kinds of features on here. We're on AC TIG. If you get on AC Pulse, you get into Pulse frequency and all kinds of different stuff. DC pulse and stick. We're just going to leave on AC TIG up here. We're mainly concerned with this little light right here. This is pre-flow, peak amps, which is always defaults back to its 120, post-flow, AC hertz, and AC balance. There's these other settings here, and that's for the 2T, 4T for the little button on the TIG torch. So we're going to go through the graph here. Pre-flow is half a second. This is that ramping we don't need to concern about. Peak amps, 120. Ramping we don't need to worry about. This is post-flow. AC hertz, which is interesting. 120 is where I like to run it, but this one has a way bigger setting than the Vulcan. It goes down to 20 and goes all the way up to 250, which is pretty awesome. Probably not going to need it, but you got a wide range of settings on here. So we're going to go back to 120. AC balance is 30. This one reads different than the Vulcan. It goes up to 65 and it goes all the way down to 15, but I think around 30 to 32 is good. And then it always defaults back to peak amps, which when you push your pedal all the way down, it will only go up to 120 because we have it set there. Now that we went over the basics on setting up your machines, before we start welding, I'll put a little graph on the side where I have everything set on these machines so you can reference back to that in a little bit. Now we're going to talk about tungsten and gas. We covered this in the previous video, but we'll give a brief overview of it again. Whether you're welding aluminum, steel, or stainless steel, you want 100% pure argon. You don't want to be running 75-25, nothing like that. I run in my shop for steel, stainless steel, or aluminum, gray and blue tungsten, usually 3/32, but maybe you can run some 1/16 in there as well. I just found the 3/32 blue or gray works for me. You can do your research, you can spend hours reading about them, and if you really want to learn more about all the different colors, go right ahead and do some research. 3/32 gray, and there's some 1/16 inch that's blue. So I just get a wide range of packets of these things online. You can order them from Yeswelder. This is some other stuff I order on Amazon. You get a big pack of them. This comes with 1/16 inch and 3/32. Now we're going to jump over to welding lenses. This basically is your standard. This is, I think, a number 5 here. It's got a little number 5 written on it. I don't tend to use these. These come with most kits. You can weld just fine with them, but I like the stubby gas lenses. This is a ceramic cup stubbier. It's got a little bit of stainless wire mesh inside, which diffuses your gas flow inside of here. I don't know if you're going to be able to see up into there, but there's some stainless in there. And it just kind of gives you a better gas shielding around your welding. And I really like these Pyrex cups as well. They're pretty useful. You can kind of see what you're doing a little bit better, and you can get those as well. I'll put some links below to some Yeswelder ones. I've been happy with the simple kits. So here's a 49-piece stubby gas lens kit. They're not that expensive. You get your Pyrex cups here. You also get your stubby ceramics. This is a number 8. Goes down to some micro sizes right here. Number 4, but super small. That fits a different one of these lenses. Got all your stainless steel screening in here. It just diffuses the gas better. Something like this is gonna really last you quite a while, so I highly recommend picking one of these up. So now, give you a basic little background on aluminum. We're gonna mainly be focusing on 5000, 6000 series aluminum today. This is 6061. I happen to have a great supply of salvaged. Whether you got salvaged aluminum or new, you're still going to clean it. We'll get to that next after this. But 5 and 6000 series is a really good aluminum for welding. It's something you should pretty much seek out if you're going to work on your projects. 1, 3, and 4000 series aluminum is okay to mediocrely okay for welding. You might run into some issues with welding some of them. And the 7000 series, you should probably just stay away from. It's extremely hard and brittle and extremely hard to weld. It's something you just don't even bother with. So 6061 is what we have here today, and we're going to go into a little bit more on cleaning it. We're going to talk about filler rod next. All right, so if you don't have it already, I highly recommend going out and picking up 2 different varieties of filler rod. This is 53, 56, 3/32, and this is 3/32, 40, 43. I got these at Harbor Freight. I think they're 10, 12 bucks a tube. We don't have any good welding shops around, so it's kind of nice to be able to get supplies like this. We'll step in a little closer and talk about which each of these are better for. And these are both for covering 5000 and 6000 series aluminum. Will fit for some other grades as well. So this is the 40, 43, 3/32, and it tends to be a little softer and flows easier. Tends to have less cracking issues with cooling off. And this is the 53, 56, 3/32, and it's a bit harder, has a little bit more tendency to stress crack and when cooling down. But if you're going to anodize your parts after you're done, this is definitely the way to go. This stuff takes the anodizing color a lot better. This will supposedly gray out a bit. That's just a basic understanding of them. And if you got a bunch of this rod sitting around and you mix it up, at the top of the rod here, it always has a little number printed on it. So now I got some aluminum. I got some lines gridded out on here. I'm going to go over my metal cutting bandsaw and just cut some little coupons out here. And then I'll show you about cleaning up the parts and we'll start welding. Alright, so we got our coupons all cut out here. The reason why I cut a bunch of slots in here is when you get to the point of welding these coupons, I want you to have a feeling like you're actually joining two pieces of metal together like in the real world. You get the idea of where the gap is, how it can kind of vary with heat, can start melting through. So another reason, 2 slots in here gives you a little bit more practice per coupon. The reason why I didn't do just one whole sheet with a bunch of slots in it is because that one whole sheet will finally start to heat soak, where you get too much heat into one piece. You might start welding on one big piece of metal, even for this piece, for instance, at 120 amps, welds this first slot fine. If you jump right over here, it might take 110 or 100, so you're gonna have to start backing down on the amp pedal or you're gonna burn through. For just learning and beginning, we're gonna actually start out with a solid piece of aluminum, less chance of melting through on the joint, and we're just gonna clean this up and do a few passes first so you get a feel for it. But again, a bigger piece like this still can start getting really hot and taking less amperage, or you're gonna start melting through. So again, with these little coupons here, you're gonna weld one at 120 amps, set it aside, let it cool off, move on to the next one, weld one, do the same thing. When those cool down, come back to them, weld the other one. Just gives you more practice per coupon. And later you can take them and stack them up like this and start doing some T-joints with them. So you're gonna wanna pick up yourself a little acetone, have some clean paper shop rags around. You want to pick up some dedicated stainless steel brushes. This is a multi-pack I bought on Amazon. I'll put a link to these little guys. And this one's seen better days, but it's supposedly, I think I've used it only on aluminum around here. You don't want to start using it on aluminum for your jobs and then start running it on metal or steel, I should say, because it's going to cross-contaminate. You want to keep that fairly clean. You can use little stainless steel wire brushes on your angle grinder. I don't tend to do that very often. People say you shouldn't do this, use your flat wheels. I would, if I was going to use this, which I have done this technique and haven't noticed a problem, but some people say it just runs the grime into the metal more. Take a clean, dedicated flat disc only used for aluminum, and you can go down your joint and clean it. I don't highly recommend that as your first thing. If you got a lot of aluminum to clean up, it looks pretty grungy, use that and then the acetone on it. Not my first suggestion, but I have done it before. Some people say not to. It worked for me. I'm going to take a wire brush, go up and down the joint, knock off any corrosion. It's going to start getting a little bit shinier aluminum. Take a little acetone on a shop rag. Clean off your part. You can see all the grime and gunk that came off of there. And before you weld, you'll want to take your TIG welding rod, and you're just going to want to wipe that off with the acetone as well. And that's all contamination that would have gotten your weld in here. So just a good point to clean everything up the best you can. So before we get started here, I want to point out a few things that could throw you for a loop when you're learning how to aluminum weld. One is a lot of welders vent out the front, and if you have it mounted something like this, it will actually blow enough air across your workbench. It may cause problems with your shielding gas and blow it away from your welding joint, which you'll be chasing all kinds of problems, and it's just not worth it. So in no way am I blocking the vent. I'm actually just putting this piece of aluminum in here so the vent will actually be diverted downward below the welding table. Another thing, you really want to get yourself a little respirator. I'll put links below for this Miller. This is a super compact one that fits under your welding helmet. They're only like 30 some bucks. Worthwhile, especially for aluminum. I have a fan overhead. I commonly turn that on as well. Another thing, you're only doing practicing, you can cut this filler rod down in half. It makes it a lot easier so you don't have like a 2.5 foot piece of filler rod hanging out to the side of you. So now we got a little practice piece all cleaned up, filler rod's cleaned up. We're going to be using the high frequency start, of course, on the AC TIG. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to bring your torch right over the aluminum, maybe an 1/8 inch to 3/16 off the aluminum. You're going to roll that pedal on all the way up until full power, which we have it set to 120 amps, and it will initiate a little high frequency arc jump that jumps down to aluminum, start the main arc. From there, we're going to wait at 120 amps, full throttle we should say, until we got a nice weld puddle, and then we're going to slowly start adding the filler rod. Try not to jump your torch all the time, and try not to hit the filler rod to the tungsten, of course. If you do dip your tungsten, which is going to happen numerous times, just stop. Don't try to keep going. If you see a green flash for a second, you just dip the tungsten in the aluminum. So pull out your tungsten, put another one in, or go to the workbench and grind it, clean it up. We covered grinding tungsten in the first video. Another thing about aluminum welding, if you dip the tungsten at all, it has a wicking effect and it'll wick up the tungsten a little ways. I'll show you a little description of what that looks like. So you'll want to grind and clean that off as well. All right, let's jump in here for a practice weld. Practice shot, so I'm not actually going to initiate the arc, but we're going to set this TIG torch at maybe a 15-degree angle. We're going to travel this way. We got our 53-56 filler rod here. All the parts are all nice and clean. We're going to get it about an 1/8 to 3/16 off the aluminum. We're going to roll the pedal all the way down until we get a nice puddle there. Once we see a nice puddle flow, we can start dipping the filler rod in. Every time you dip the filler rod, it will actually cool the puddle slightly. If the puddle is getting really wide and hot, looking like it's melting through, you'll want to ease off in your amp pedal a little bit. And then once you get to the end of your joint, you'll want to ease off a little bit, put a little bit more filler rod in there, roll your amps way down and back up over the joint a tiny bit, and then drop off the pedal 100% so it shuts off. Adding that little bit of filler rod at the very end and easing off your amps will help the joint not get a kind of a dimple or a pocket or a weak spot there. Doesn't hurt to just weld little 2-inch sections. Start, stop, practice starting, practice stopping, and continue on. Really, the idea right here on this main sheet of aluminum is just to practice, have fun. Practice starting, rolling on the pedal, making sure you got the liquid pool right there before you start adding filler. Ramping off your amperage towards the end, adding a little extra filler so you don't actually end up with a big crater. If you don't ramp down your amps and add filler at the end, you'll get a crater. So here's what happens if you just drop your amps off really quickly without adding any filler. You'll get this actual crater right in here, which is prone to stress cracking. So you definitely want to add a little filler right at the very end and ramp your amps down, and even bring your arc back here a little bit as you drop it completely off. All right, now we got some practice welds on that sheet of aluminum. We're going to go over to these little joints on the coupon here. We got this coupon all nice and cleaned up. Acetone, got the bottle of acetone away from the workbench. We got our rod cleaned up as well. Going to be running 53-56. Keep in mind 120 amps is probably a little high for this 1/8 inch, but that's why we got an amp pedal. So when you start it, you get a nice hot weld really quick, get a puddle, and after that you might back it down to maybe 115 or 110 to finish this up. And you can control the heat a little bit by how much filler rod you're dabbing along the way and how fast you're traveling. All right, let's lay some welds on these. So I want to give a shout out to 2 excellent YouTube channels when it comes to welding. I highly recommend going down the description after you're done with this video and clicking on them and subscribing. First one is Jody, and that's at Welding Tips and Tricks. Great channel. Another one very specific to TIG welding is Dusty at Pacific Arc TIG Welding. Great channel, so check them out. So on this next coupon right here, we're going to do a little bit of a heat penetration test. This first bead I'm laying on nice and hot, and it's going to be a little bit flatter weld bead profile, but it's going to be nice and deep. This next one here, I purposely backed off the amperage a little bit. It's going to have a stack of dimes kind of look like a lot of people like going for. It's going to be a little bit taller bead profile, but what you're going to see once I cut them apart is the difference in the weld internally. And so this is that one I laid on extra hot. It's a little wider. a little flatter bead profile. And the one right next to it has more of a stack of dimes kind of look, and it sits up a little bit taller, and that's the one I purposely laid down a little cooler. We're going to take it to the bandsaw next and cut it open. We'll see what it looks like inside. So here's that test coupon cut apart. Here's the more flat weld profile right here. This is the more stack of dimes, kind of raised up profile. Looks good from here. This one looks nicer, doesn't it? But you turn it over and we only got about half a penetration in that joint. See that? And over here we got 100%. So it's kind of good to cut the stuff apart, get an idea what you're doing. You can kind of see on the back side of the weld as well. This is flush all the way through the whole seam. This side you can see a 1/16 inch of that joint all the way down it. So while you're practicing, you might be starting laying some nice welds on, but once in a while cut them open and see how they look. Doesn't hurt to do some tests like this, because a lot better to figure it out on parts like this than to weld something up for you or your friend and find out it breaks later on because you didn't get full penetration. All right, we got the Hynade welder here. We're going to weld one more coupon with it. As you see, I got this little sheet of aluminum here to kind of help cut down any fan blowing across the table here. This one has a pretty cool on-demand fan. It won't come on for the first minute or two of welding. It's got a thermal switch inside, and when the internal components warm up enough, we'll turn on the fan, which is nice. Towards the end of the video here, we will actually also talk about AC balance, AC frequency, a little bit about pulse, and a few scenarios we'll cover in case you're having problems, how to troubleshoot them a lot easier. So let's get welding. If you're getting into TIG welding at all, I highly recommend picking up one of these TIG welder holders. This one I bought for 15 bucks on Amazon. It's got a nice sturdy magnet on it, and just holds your torch when you're setting up your work. Because if you do drop these off your table, you will start breaking some of these ceramic cups here. So get one of these, treat yourself, 15 bucks. So there's the two welds I did with that Hynade welder. Works really well. It's becoming one of my favorites. It's just super smooth and predictable. So here's a real world little setting. It's an old aluminum pannier my brother had kicking around. It's all kind of corroded, and cleaned it up. He wanted me to plug weld all the little holes, old mounting holes, so he could use it for a sealed box. And it's all 1/16 inch, really thin aluminum, kind of corroded, and Hynade worked great. So here's some of the plug welds I did for him. It's pretty happy with the results. If you don't already have one of these argon flow meters, I highly recommend you pick one up. It's going to save you a lot of money in the long run on not wasting a bunch of argon gas. I paid about $40 for this one. You can use your regular regulator for welding, but I just find that these just give a more gentle argon flow, save you a lot in gas. So we'll talk about AC balance now. Basically, the more negative you go, the more heat that goes into your aluminum. It's all a balance. So more heat you get in the aluminum, your tungsten will stay pointed. The more positive you go, the more cleaning action you get to break off the oxides off your aluminum. But the more your tungsten will end up balling. You can get it so hot where it puts so much heat in your tungsten that it will actually be molten on the end. You can even get the end to drip and fall off of there. So it's one of those things, it's a balance to getting heat into the aluminum and the cleaning action from negative and positive. So it's kind of a balance there. That's why it's called AC balance. So you'll have to fine tune it. I highly recommend you go through, crank it all the way one way, ball that tungsten up. Try it the other way, put a lot of heat in your aluminum. You'll realize it doesn't have much cleaning action there. So find a happy middle and somewhere in between there. It doesn't hurt to play around with your machine. The more you adjust these parameters one at a time, the more you'll have a better understanding what it is. It won't be a mystery to you. So here's some tungsten. This is commonly where I run my machines for AC balance. It just balls the end just slightly. This is an extreme example where basically we cranked up the positive on the tungsten, so it got super hot and it balled up here. This would have been just basically a liquid ball of tungsten and was ready to drip in your weld. You don't want that. I just did it for an extreme example here. So AC frequency, or some call it AC hertz, it's basically the amount of times per second the alternating current switch between electrode positive and electrode negative. So it's kind of another one of those adjustments you can do to fine tune your welding. I leave most of my machines about 120, but the higher the number, you can imagine the arc gets a little more narrow for doing just narrower work, fine-tuned work. And the lower the number, maybe the wider the arc you're going to get for maybe filling in wider, welding bigger joints and things like that. So that's kind of a rule of thumb for that. But if you just set your machine at 120, it's pretty good. Play around with it though. Go higher, go lower. You'll notice when you really get high in the hertz, the machine makes an interesting sound. It becomes almost pretty annoying. So I like to run mine around 120. That's a good rule of thumb. But play around with your machine and see what you get. So we never use pulse on either of these welders in the video. I just felt the video is going to be long and it's just going to complicate things. It's not make or break on a welder. It's just another nice setting. It's mainly for sometimes welding thin steel, stainless steel or aluminum. You don't 100% need it, but basically it's a square wave, and you can set your, say, 120 for your peak amps, and then you can set your lower amps at like 80, and basically it will go from 120 set duration time down to 80 set duration time and back up. It will sound like this. And basically if you set it at like 0.8 seconds, you can add your filler rod on the high amperage side and then just hang out there for a moment on the low pulse. Move forward again on the high amperage side, add a little more filler rod. You can kind of get into a rhythm for adding your filler rod. It might be helpful when you're starting out to set it at something like 0.8 seconds. But you shouldn't do it all the time because you don't really want to make it a crutch or something you depend on. But play around with it. The higher the pulse, the quicker it's going to cycle. The lower pulse time, the lower it's going to cycle. And you can set your base amps and high amps and all that kind of stuff. But it's something to play around with. It's not a make or break if your welder doesn't have that, but it's just another nice setting to have. So we'll go over a few quick problems that you might run up against. And one is erratic starts. If you're rolling your pedal very gently, you might get erratic start. I get them on the Vulcan Pro TIG 205 sometimes. And that erratic start, I'll show you a little example here. That can be a few things. It can be your post flow's too short and your tungsten is oxidizing as it cools down. You don't have enough shielding gas around it. Another thing can be that your ground clamp isn't actually getting a good ground to your work. Well, it's actually a positive clamp, so it's a work clamp. But sometimes you might want to just hook your clamp to your actual aluminum. That can help things so you don't have erratic starts. Another thing is you're just rolling on the pedal too slowly. Just mash it on. You're good to go. You want to get that aluminum hot anyways. Another thing you can do is if you have erratic start, you can just tap your tungsten on your workbench or your aluminum or anything like that without pushing on the pedal. Sometimes it'll just clean the tip of the tungsten a little bit. So try that. Another thing I've ran into is welding early on. This was really tough when I was starting out. Was I ended up actually having all kinds of problems. I had 100% argon gas and I was getting these really bad welds all of a sudden. I had like 300 psi in my tank still. It was getting lower, but I still had 300 psi. Well, you can run into bad gas. It depends on who's filling the bottles, if they purge them or anything like that. So if you start getting low 300-400 pounds and you start having like sooty welds, kind of some brown soot around them and things like that, you shouldn't be having any of that. So even if you have 100% argon gas, doesn't mean the last few hundred psi is good. I know around here who we go through the gas supplier, I've found that to be super common. And it was really difficult starting out trying to learn how to weld, and like, I got gas still, but it's welding terrible. What's going on? Finally, I just got a new bottle, took care of the problem. I know the signs to look for now, but if you're having like brown sooty welds around your bead you're laying down, think about checking about your bottle. Even talk to your gas supplier. Explain, I think this bottle needs to be purged. They might even give you a discount on your next fill up. So something else to consider. Just have fun with it. If you're welding, TIG welding, practice. Just practice, practice, practice. Make sure your aluminum's clean. Have fun. Don't be tense. Relax. It's not going to happen that hour. It's not going to happen that day. It's not going to happen for weeks before you really get comfortable. You just practice, practice, practice. You'll get better and better and better at it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below. If you really want to help me and support me, those two things can really help out. Another thing you can do is you can go order some components like that little TIG torch holder, maybe some tungsten through the links below. That gives me a little bit of kickback. a few percent on everything you order. So order through there. I'll have links for this welder and a bunch of Yeswelder stuff too as well. You save some money on the Yeswelder equipment. All right, until next time, thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.